The photograph in Sarah Mitchell's hands revealed a dark figure watching through her childhood bedroom window, a shadow her forensic photographer's eye instantly recognized as serial killer Bob Cavanaugh, supposedly dead for 27 years. Her mother's decades of paranoid window checking and obsessive security measures suddenly made terrifying sense as Sarah realized they had never been truly alone in that house on Maple Street. The rhythmic hum of the scanner filled Sarah Mitchell's home office as another photograph slid through the machine. The familiar scent of old paper and photo albums transported her back to childhood summers. But something else lingered beneath the nostalgia, an unease she couldn't quite place. At 42, Sarah had built her reputation as one of Denver's most respected forensic photographers, her keen eye for detail making her invaluable to local law enforcement. Yet nothing in her professional life had prepared her for what she was about to discover in her own past. The afternoon light filtered through her office window, casting long shadows across the desk, cluttered with old albums. Her mother's meticulous organization had made the digitization project easier. Each photograph labeled with dates and occasions and Laura Mitchell's precise handwriting. Sarah paused to massage her temples, her eyes tired from hours of scanning. The wall clock showed 6:47 p.m., and the setting sun painted her cream-colored walls in shades of amber. Just one more album, she murmured to herself, reaching for the warm blue photo book labeled Summer 1984-1985. The cover's faux leather was cracked with age, the corners dog-eared from years of handling. As she opened it, the plastic sheets crackled, releasing that distinctive musty scent of preserved memories. The first few photos were typical family scenes: birthday parties, backyard barbecues, her father teaching her to ride a bike. Sarah smiled at her younger self, gap-toothed and perpetually wearing her favorite rainbow shirt. Then she came to a series of photos from their old house on Maple Street. Something about them made her pause. The images showed their Victorian-style home in different seasons: spring flowers blooming, summer leaves in full canopy, autumn colors, and winter snow. Standard documentary shots her father liked to take to track the property's changes. Sarah was about to move on when her professional instincts kicked in. Something in the composition caught her eye. She pulled out her magnifying glass, a habit from work, and began examining each photo more closely. The first image showed their house in May 1984, the cherry tree in full bloom. There, barely visible through the living room window, a dark shape. Could be anything, she thought. A shadow, a piece of furniture, a trick of the light. The next photo, taken in July. Different angle, different time of day, but again, that same peculiar shadow visible through a different window. Sarah's heart began to beat faster as she moved through the photos methodically, her trained eye now alert to patterns. 8 photos, spanning months, each showing the same disturbing detail: a human-shaped shadow watching from various windows of their house. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from Detective James Cooper, her longtime colleague. Still on for tomorrow's case review? Sarah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Cooper had been on the force for over 30 years. He would have been working during the period these photos were taken. She typed back, "Yes, but I need to show you something personal. Bring your cold case experience." The response came quickly. "Intriguing. Everything okay?" "Not sure yet. See you at 9. Sarah returned to the photos, her stomach tight with anxiety. As a forensic photographer, she developed an eye for details others missed. The shadows positioning in each photo suggested someone watching, someone who knew the family's routines well enough to avoid detection. The thought sent a chill down her spine, despite the warm evening air. Her mother had always been overprotective during those years, installing extra locks, checking windows obsessively, never letting Sarah play outside alone. At the time, it had seemed like typical maternal anxiety. Now, Sarah wondered if there had been more to it. She reached for her phone again, scrolling to her mother's number. Laura Mitchell was 72 now, living in a comfortable retirement community across town. Their weekly Sunday dinners were pleasant but superficial, filled with talk about the weather and community gossip. They never discussed the past. "Mom, Sorry to call so late, but I've been going through the old photos. Oh, lovely. Found any good ones of your father? I've been meaning to put together a memory book. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The ones from Maple Street, around 84, 85. Did you ever notice anything unusual during that time? The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Laura spoke again, her voice had lost its warmth. Why do you ask? Just curious about some details in the photos. Sarah, her mother's voice turned sharp. Leave the past where it belongs. Some things are better forgotten. Mom, what aren't you telling me? I have bridge in the morning. I should go to bed. Love you, dear. The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She stared at her phone, then back at the photos spread across her desk. Her mother's reaction only confirmed her suspicions. There was something here, something that had been buried for 40 years. She opened her laptop and pulled up the police database she used for work. A quick search for cases in their old neighborhood between 1984 and 1985 yielded several results. 2 missing persons cases, a suspicious death-ruled accident, and a series of break-ins, all within a 5-block radius of their old house. Sarah began making notes, her photographer's mind collecting and cataloging details. The shape in the windows appeared in photos dated May 15th, July 3rd, August 28th, October 12th, and December 7th, 1984. She'd need to cross-reference these dates with the case files tomorrow. The scanner hummed to life again as she fed another photo through. This one showed their backyard during a summer barbecue. Sarah squinted at the image on her screen, zooming in on the background. Beyond the fence, partially hidden by bushes, she could make out a figure watching the gathering. The timestamp read July 3rd, 1984. The same day, 19-year-old Lisa Martinez disappeared from her evening jog, never to be seen again. Sarah's hands began to shake. She'd specialized in forensic photography because she believed in the power of images to reveal truth, to bring justice. Now, sitting in her quiet office with the sun almost set, she realized she might have stumbled onto something far more personal than any case she'd ever worked. The wall clock ticked steadily as shadows lengthened across her desk. In the growing darkness, Sarah could almost imagine someone watching her through her own windows, just as they had 4 decades ago. She got up and drew the blinds, then returned to the photographs that were quickly becoming more than just childhood memories. They were becoming evidence. The morning traffic hummed outside Sarah's office at the Denver Police Department's forensic unit as she arranged the old photographs across her desk. She barely slept, spending most of the night digitizing the remaining albums and creating a detailed timeline. The familiar smell of stale coffee and industrial cleaner couldn't mask her unease as she waited for Detective Cooper. James Cooper's heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway before he appeared in her doorway, his silver hair and weathered face, testament to his 35 years on the force. He carried 2 coffee cups, placing one on her desk before settling into the chair across from her. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, studying her face. "Maybe I have." Sarah pushed the first photo across the desk. "This is from my family home, 1984. Look at the window." Cooper leaned forward, squinting through his reading glasses. His expression shifted subtly, something Sarah had learned to watch for during their years working together. He knew something. "Tell me about the cases from that period," she said quietly. "The ones around Maple Street." He took a long sip of coffee, buying time. "That was a difficult period. We had several cases we couldn't crack. The neighborhood was terrified, but we never had enough evidence to move forward." He paused, looking at her carefully. "Your mother never told you?" "Told me what?" Cooper pulled out a small notebook, worn and yellowed with age. "I keep this as a reminder of my failures. The cases that got away." He flipped through the pages. Between 1983 and 1985, we had 6 missing persons cases in that area, all women, ages ranging from 19 to 35. 2 bodies were found. The others, he shook his head. Sarah's throat tightened as she laid out the rest of the photos in chronological order. "Look at the dates. Each time this figure appears in our windows, it correlates with one of the disappearances, doesn't it?" Cooper checked his notebook, his face growing grimmer with each comparison. "July 3rd, Lisa Martinez. October 12th, Rachel Thompson. December 7th, Catherine Wells. He looked up at Sarah. How did we miss this? The photos were in our family album. Nobody thought to look there. Sarah pulled up the scanned images on her computer. I've enhanced them as much as possible. The figure is always positioned the same way, slightly hunched, watching. And look at this. She pointed to a detail in one of the photos. What appears to be a camera strap around the neck. He was documenting Cooper, just like he was being documented without knowing it. Sarah's office door opened, and Emma Chun from the archives department stepped in, carrying a box of files. I found everything we have on the Maple Street cases, she said, setting the box down, including some photos that never made it into the official reports. Emma was new to the department, but her efficiency and discretion had quickly made her invaluable. She spread out a series of crime scene photos across Sarah's desk, creating a grotesque timeline alongside the family photos. The victims were all photographed before they were taken, Emma explained, pointing to pictures found near the bodies. The killer watched them, documented their routines. It was part of his ritual. Sarah felt her professional detachment slipping as she looked at the victims' photos. Young women going about their daily lives, unaware they were being hunted, just as her family had been unaware of the predator watching through their windows. Why didn't you ever catch him? She asked Cooper, unable to keep the accusation from her voice. The detective's face showed old pain. We had theories, suspects, but nothing concrete. The photographs found with the victims were technically perfect. No fingerprints, no trace evidence. They were taken by someone who understood photography, who knew how to cover their tracks. A professional, Sarah whispered, her mind racing. She pulled up an old staff directory from the local newspaper where her father had worked as a photojournalist. Someone who would have had access to professional equipment, who would know how to process their own photos. Cooper leaned forward. Sarah, what are you thinking? The newspaper had a whole photography department. Dad used to take me there sometimes. She scrolled through the names, stopping at the listings for 1984. Look at this. They had a crime beat photographer who covered all the major cases, including the murders. Emma moved closer to read the screen. Robert Kavanaugh? Cooper's face went pale. Bob Kavanaugh. I interviewed him multiple times about the cases. He always seemed genuinely interested in helping, offered insights about the photo evidence. He trailed off, realization dawning. He had access to all the crime scenes. He knew every detail of the investigation. And he would have known my father, Sarah added, her voice tight. Known our house, our routines. Dad probably invited him over for dinner, like he did with other photographers from the paper. She pulled up another database search. Kavanaugh died in 1997. Car accident on Mount Evans. Body was never recovered. Convenient, Cooper muttered. But why your house? Why document himself in your family photos? Sarah stared at the images spread across her desk. The shadowy figure in the windows, the murdered women, her own smiling childhood face. Maybe he wanted someone to know. Maybe he was leaving a signature we were meant to find eventually. Emma began organizing the crime scene photos chronologically. Look at the progression. The time between stalking and abduction got shorter with each victim. He was escalating until he suddenly stopped, Cooper added. After December 1985, there were no more cases matching his pattern. Sarah felt a chill as another memory surfaced. That's when we moved. Mom insisted, said the house was too big for us. Dad argued, but she wouldn't back down. She reached for her phone. I need to talk to her again. She knew something. Be careful, Cooper warned. If your mother kept this quiet all these years, she had her reasons. Those women deserve justice, Sarah said, standing up, even if it's decades late, even if the killer is dead. Their families deserve to know what happened. Emma gathered the files back into the box. I'll dig deeper into Kavanaugh's background. Employment records, addresses, anything that might connect him to the victims. And I'll reopen the cases, Cooper said. Officially this time, new evidence changes everything. Sarah looked once more at the photo of her childhood home, at the dark figure watching from the window. She thought of all the time she'd played in that house, unaware of the predator documenting her family's life, her mother's overprotective behavior, her insistence on moving, It all made terrible sense now. "We're going to need to interview everyone who worked at the newspaper during that period," she said, her investigator's mind taking over. "And I want to go back to the house. The current owners might let us look around." Cooper nodded. "I'll get a team together." "But, Sarah," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Are you sure you want to lead this investigation? Given your personal connection?" Sarah thought of the victims' faces, their interrupted lives, their families still waiting for answers. She thought of her mother's fear, carried silently for decades. "I'm not just leading it," she said. "I'm finishing it." The driveway of Laura Mitchell's retirement community was lined with perfectly manicured rosebush, their blooms bright against the morning fog. Sarah sat in her car, the engine off, staring at the manila envelope on the passenger seat. Inside were the enhanced photos, the evidence of a nightmare that had lurked in the background of her childhood. Her mother's apartment was on the second floor, overlooking a small courtyard where residents gathered for morning Tai Chi. Sarah watched them through her windshield, their slow, synchronized movements a stark contrast to the chaos in her mind. Finally, she grabbed the envelope and stepped out into the cool morning air. Lavra opened the door before Sarah could knock, as if she'd been waiting. "I knew you'd come," she said softly, her silver hair neatly styled, her clothes perfectly pressed, maintaining control through routine as always. "Come in. I've made coffee." The apartment was bright and orderly, family photos arranged carefully on the walls. Sarah noticed that none were from the Maple Street house. Her mother led her to the small dining table, where 2 cups of coffee steamed beside a plate of untouched scones. "Show me what you found," Lavra said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah spread the photos across the table, watching her mother's face. Laura's composed expression cracked slightly as she looked at the shadowy figure in the windows, her hands beginning to tremble. "You know," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Lavra closed her eyes briefly. "Of course I knew. A mother knows when her children are in danger." She touched one of the photos gently. "I used to check every window, every door, multiple times a day. Your father thought I was being paranoid. Why didn't you tell the police?" "I did." Laura's voice hardened. "I went to them 3 times. They said there was no evidence of anyone breaking in, no signs of stalking. They suggested I see a therapist for my anxiety." She laughed bitterly. "Even your father didn't believe me. He worked with Bob every day, trusted him." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You knew it was Kavanaugh?" "I suspected. The way he looked at you at company picnics, how he always positioned himself to take photos of everyone. He had this way of watching." Laura's hands shook as she reached for her coffee cup. Then the women started disappearing. "I read every article, studied every detail. I knew it was him, but I couldn't prove it. So you made us move. It was the only way I could think to protect you." Lavra looked up at her daughter, tears in her eyes. He was getting bolder, coming closer to the house. "One night, I found footprints in the flower bed under your bedroom window." Sarah's stomach churned as she remembered her childhood bedroom, the window that overlooked the backyard. How many nights had he stood there, watching her sleep? The last straw was finding this. Lavra stood up and went to a locked drawer in her desk. She returned with a yellowed envelope. Inside was a photograph Sarah had never seen before, herself at 11 years old, walking home from school. The photo was taken from inside a car, through the windshield. On the back was written, "She looks just like her mother. I threatened him." Lavra continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Told him if anything ever happened to you, I had evidence that would destroy him. It was a bluff, but..." She shrugged. "We moved 2 weeks later, to the other side of the city." Sarah stared at the photo of her younger self, feeling violated in a way she couldn't articulate. Did Dad ever know? No. After we moved, after the killing stopped, I decided to carry it alone. Your father died believing his friend was a good man. Laura's voice broke slightly. Sometimes I envied him that ignorance. Mom, Sarah reached across the table, taking her mother's trembling hands. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. We've reopened the cases. Cooper's building a task force. James Cooper? Lavra smiled sadly. He was the only one who ever took me seriously. He didn't have enough evidence to act, but he warned me to trust my instincts. We have evidence now. Your photos, your testimony. we can finally give those families answers. Lavra withdrew her hands, standing up to pace the small room. You don't understand. Kavanaugh had friends in the department, at the newspaper, people who helped cover for him, whether they knew it or not. Even dead, he has protectors. Had protectors, Sarah corrected. Times have changed, Mom. We have new technology, new ways of analyzing evidence. And we have these. She gestured to the photos. Your documentation of his behavior, even if you didn't know that's what you were doing at the time. It was your father's habit of photographing the house that saved us. Lavra said quietly. Bob never realized he was capturing himself in the background. A predator caught by his own medium. A knock at the door made both women jump. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her phone, but it was only the morning caregiver with Laura's medications. As the caregiver bustled around the kitchen, Sarah gathered the photos back into the envelope. I need you to come to the station, she said softly. Make a formal statement. It's time to tell your story. Lavra looked out the window at the Tai Chi practitioners, still moving in their peaceful rhythm. All these years, I've wondered about the other mothers, the ones who didn't see the danger in time, who couldn't save their daughters. Help me give them closure, Sarah urged. Help me finish this. Lavra turned back to her daughter, and for the first time, Sarah saw not the anxious, overprotective mother of her childhood, but a warrior who had fought a silent battle for decades. When do we start? Now, Sarah said, standing. Cooper's waiting at the station. And Mom? She hugged her mother tightly. Thank you for saving my life. Lavra hugged her back fiercely. A mother knows, she whispered. A mother always knows. As they left the apartment, Sarah noticed her mother checked the lock twice. Old habits dying hard. But there was new strength in Laura's step as they walked to the car, as if setting down a burden she'd carried for far too long. The morning fog was finally lifting, revealing a clear blue sky above. It felt like an omen, Sarah thought. The shadows of the past were about to be brought into the light. The interview room at the police station felt smaller than usual, its gray walls closing in as Sarah watched through the one-way glass. Her mother sat ramrod straight at the metal table, hands folded precisely in front of her, as Detective Cooper gently led her through her statement. Emma Chun stood beside Sarah, taking notes. There were signs, little things. Laura's voice came through the speakers. Items moved slightly in the house when we've been away. The phone ringing late at night, no one there when we answered. Bob would mention things at newspaper events, details about our routines he shouldn't have known. Can you be more specific? Cooper asked, his pen poised above his notepad. He once commented on how Sarah had gotten better at piano practice, but we never mentioned she was taking lessons. He knew because he'd been watching through the living room window. Laura's composure cracked slightly. I started keeping a diary, documenting everything. I still have it. Sarah turned to Emma. We need that diary. Already sent an officer to collect it, Emma replied, along with any other documents your mother kept from that period. Inside the interview room, Cooper spread out photographs of the victims. Did you ever notice Bob paying particular attention to any of these women? Lavra studied the images, her hands trembling slightly. Lisa Martinez. She jogged past our house every evening. Bob came over for dinner one night, sat by the window, said he was admiring the sunset, but he was watching the street. 3 days later, she disappeared. Sarah felt her phone vibrate, a message from the forensics team at her mother's apartment. They'd found the diary, hidden in a false bottom of an old jewelry box, along with more photographs and newspaper clippings about the murders. Your mother's meticulous, Emma observed. She kept everything organized by date, cross-referenced with news reports. She was building a case, Sarah realized. Even back then, she was gathering evidence. The interview continued for another hour, Laura's testimony filling in gaps that had plagued investigators for decades. She described patterns of surveillance, subtle threats, moments when Kavanaugh had revealed too much knowledge about their private lives. With each detail, the portrait of a calculating predator emerged. When Cooper finally ended the interview, Sarah entered the room and hugged her mother. Lavra was exhausted but composed, her burden visibly lighter. There's something else, Laura said as they walked to the car. Something I never told anyone. The night before we moved, I went to the newspaper office to confront Bob. He wasn't there, but his desk drawer was unlocked. Inside, I found a photo album. Sarah stopped walking. What kind of photos? Trophies. Pictures of women. Some I recognized from the news, others I'd never seen. All taken without their knowledge. And behind each photo, Lavra took a shaky breath. Behind each photo was a lock of hair. Mom, why didn't you take the album? I was afraid. If he knew I'd seen it, I had to protect you. But I memorized every face, every detail. I can still see them all. Laura's voice hardened. The album would be proof. Real evidence. Sarah shared a look with Cooper, who had followed them out. The newspaper office was demolished in 2002, he said. But the company stored their archives in a warehouse outside the city. If Kavanaugh kept trophies at work, he might have kept other evidence too, Sarah said. We need to search those archives. I'll get a warrant. Cooper nodded. But Sarah, this is decades-old evidence we're talking about. Even if we find something, it's more than we had yesterday, she insisted. And we have Mom's diary now, her documentation. It's enough to establish a pattern. Lavra touched her daughter's arm. There's something else you should know. After we moved, I hired a private investigator to track Bob's movements. The reports are in a safety deposit box at Western Union Bank. You never stopped investigating. Sarah realized. How could I? Those women deserve justice. Their families deserved answers. Lavra straightened her shoulders. The investigator found something interesting. Bob made regular trips to a cabin in the mountains. Monthly, sometimes weekly. Even in winter, Cooper was already on his phone, coordinating with his team. We'll need the location of that cabin. It's all in the reports, Lavra assured him. Everything I could gather without putting Sarah at risk. Sarah watched her mother, seeing her in a new light. While she'd been growing up feeling overprotected and restricted, Lavra had been waging a silent war, gathering intelligence, building a case she hoped would someday bring justice. The warehouse search team can be ready in an hour, Emma reported, joining them. And the bank's cooperating on the safety deposit box. Sarah turned to her mother. Are you up for more? We could use your memory, your knowledge of that time. Lavra squared her shoulders. I've waited 40 years to see this through. I'm not stopping now. Single quotes as they drove toward the warehouse. Sarah noticed her mother watching the rearview mirror, checking for tails. Habits formed in fear, carried through decades. But there was something else in Laura's bearing now. Determination, purpose, the strength of a survivor ready to tell her story. The warehouse loomed ahead, a massive concrete structure on the outskirts of town. As they pulled into the parking lot, Sarah saw the forensics team already setting up, preparing to search through decades of archived materials for evidence of a predator's trophy collection. Ready? She asked her mother. Laura nodded, her eyes fixed on the warehouse. It's time to bring it all into the light. The warehouse air was thick with dust and decades of stored secrets. Sarah and the forensics team moved methodically through the aisles of archived materials, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. The newspaper's storage section was vast, row after row of boxes containing photographs, negatives, and files from the 1980s. The photography department's archives should be in Section D, Emma called out, consulting a faded inventory map. Kavanaugh's work would have been filed by date and assignment type. Lavra stood in the center aisle, her eyes closed. His desk was on the second floor of the newspaper building, northwest corner. He kept his personal files separate from the work assignments. Cooper directed his team to spread out, focusing on boxes labeled with Kavanaugh's name or the years of the murders. Sarah found herself drawn to a stack of unmarked containers tucked behind the main archives. Over here, she called, pulling on latex gloves. The first box contained routine crime scene photos, car accidents, robberies, the mundane work of a newspaper photographer. But beneath them, Mom. Sarah's voice shook slightly. Are these the ones you saw? Lavra approached slowly, steeling herself. In Sarah's hands was a black album, its pages yellowed with age. The first photograph showed a young woman through a window, unaware she was being watched. Behind the photo was a small envelope containing a dark lock of hair. Lisa Martinez, Lavra whispered. That's what she looked like before. Cooper appeared beside them, evidence bags ready. We need to document everything exactly as we found it. Sarah, start photographing the album in situ. Emma, get the evidence log started. Page after page reveal Kavanaugh's victims. Some known, others never connected to the case before. Each photo was accompanied by a trophy, a piece of the woman he would later take. Sarah's professional detachment began to crack as she documented the evidence. These weren't just case files anymore. These were women her mother had tried to save. Wait, Lavra said suddenly. That box, the red one on the bottom shelf. I remember seeing it in his office. The metal box was locked, but Cooper's team made quick work of it. Inside, they found rolls of undeveloped film, carefully labeled with dates and initials. We'll need to process these in the dark room, Sarah said. Some of these dates match the disappearances. There's something else, Emma called from deeper in the stacks. She emerged carrying a leather-bound journal. It looks like his personal diary. Cooper took the journal carefully, opening it to a random page. His face darkened as he read. This is it. He recorded everything. His surveillance, his planning, He stopped, looking at Lavra. His thoughts about your family. Sarah watched her mother's face pale. What did he write about us? Sarah, Cooper warned, but Lavra cut him off. She needs to know. We all need to know what we were dealing with. Cooper read from the journal. The Mitchell girl reminds me of the others. So unaware, so trusting. Her mother knows something's wrong. I see her checking the windows, the locks. It's almost a game now, letting her catch glimpses of me. Her fear is intoxicating. Single quotes. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. Lavra reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. There's more, Emma said, pulling out a manila envelope from behind the journal. Inside were photographs of the Mitchell house, dozens of them, taken from every angle. The final image made Sarah's blood run cold. Her 11-year-old self, asleep in her bedroom, photographed through the window. You were right to move us, Sarah whispered to her mother. You saved my life. Laura's voice was steel. He wasn't just watching us. He was taunting me, letting me know he could get close whenever he wanted. The evidence collection continued through the afternoon. With each box opened, each file examined, the scope of Kavanaugh's crimes became clearer. He hadn't just been a murderer. He had been a meticulous documentarian of his own depravity. Sarah, Cooper called softly. There's something you should see. In a hidden compartment of the red box, they found a map. Locations were marked with dates, some corresponding to known victims, others ominously undefined. The cabin, Lavra said immediately. It's marked here, in the mountains. And these other spots could be disposal sites. Cooper finished grimly. We'll need search teams for each location. Sarah studied the map, her investigator's mind racing. Some of these marks are recent, into the 1990s, right up until his supposed death. Supposed? Emma asked. The car accident was never fully investigated, Cooper explained. No body was recovered. At the time, there was no reason to suspect that he staged his own death, Lavra finished, to escape before he could be caught. The implications hung heavy in the dusty air. If Kavanaugh had faked his death, if he'd continued his crimes elsewhere, we need to contact other jurisdictions, Sarah said. Check for similar cases after 1997. He wouldn't have stopped. Predators like this don't just stop. First, we process what we have here, Cooper insisted. This is enough to officially close the Colorado cases, to give these families answers. Lavra touched one of the photographs gently. These women, I used to dream about them. Wonder if I could have done more, saved them somehow. You did everything you could, Sarah assured her. And now we can finish what you started. The warehouse grew darker as evening approached. Evidence boxes were carefully packed and transported to the forensics lab. Sarah watched the proceedings with mixed emotions. Professional satisfaction at breaking the case, personal horror at how close she'd come to being another victim, and deep admiration for her mother's quiet strength. We should get you home, she told Lavra. It's been a long day. But Lavra shook her head, her eyes fixed on the last box being sealed. No, I need to see this through. All of it. Sarah understood. After 40 years of carrying this burden alone, Her mother deserved to be part of bringing everything into the light. As they left the warehouse, Sarah noticed her mother stand straighter, walk more confidently. The shadows were finally receding, replaced by the clarity of truth and the promise of justice. The forensics lab hummed with activity well into the night. Sarah stood at her workstation, carefully developing the rolls of film found in the warehouse. Each image that emerged from the chemical bath added another piece to the horrifying puzzle. Emma worked nearby, digitizing Kavanaugh's journal entries and cross-referencing them with cold cases from neighboring states. "Sarah," Emma called softly, "I found something. Cases in Wyoming and Utah between 1998 and 2003. Same signature. Women photographed without their knowledge. Locks of hair taken as trophies." Lavra, who had refused to leave despite the late hour, moved to examine the files on Emma's screen. He changed his hunting ground, but not his methods. Cooper entered the lab, looking exhausted but determined. Search teams are assembled for the mountain locations. We start at first light, and I've got officers processing the safety deposit box contents. Your pie was thorough. Lavra. He tracked Kavanaugh's movements for years. Sarah hung another developed photograph to dry, her hand steady despite her churning emotions. The image showed a young woman leaving work at night, unaware of the camera capturing her final moments. The date stamp matched one of the unsolved disappearances. "Mom," Sarah said carefully, "the private investigator, did he ever suspect Kavanaugh was still alive?" Lavra pulled out a worn notebook from her purse. Marcus, the investigator, followed Bob's financial records. He found regular withdrawals from an account in Utah, continuing years after the supposed accident. Small amounts, but consistent, like someone living off the grid. Cooper leaned forward. "Do you have the account details?" "Everything's in Marcus's reports. He died in 2010, but he left me all his files. Said someday they might matter." Emma was already typing. "I can track the account activity. See if it leads anywhere current." Sarah moved to the light table, arranging the newly developed photos chronologically. A pattern emerged, Kavanaugh's surveillance becoming more brazen, his photos taken from closer range as he grew confident in his methods. "He was evolving," she murmured, "learning from each crime, perfecting his technique." "A journal entry support that," Emma added. "He wrote about his art, how each woman taught him something new about stalking, about control." Laura touched one of the photos gently. "I remember her. Karen Walsh. She worked at the grocery store near our house. Always gave Sarah candy when we checked out." Her voice caught. "She disappeared 3 months before we moved." Sarah felt a chill. "He was using our routine shopping trips to find victims. Women we knew, women who were kind to me." "Don't," Lavra said firmly. "Don't take that guilt on yourself. You were a child. I was the adult who saw the danger, and you protected me," Sarah replied. "But these women, we protect them now," Cooper interrupted. "By finding the truth, by giving their families answers, and by making sure Kavanaugh can't hurt anyone else if he's still out there." The lab door opened as a young technician rushed in. "Detective Cooper, we've got something from the mountain searches. A property record from 1995, a cabin purchased under an alias we found in the journal. It's still actively maintained. Utility bills paid monthly." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Cooper was already reaching for his phone, coordinating with the search teams. Emma pulled up satellite imagery of the location, while Sarah studied the terrain maps. "The cabin's remote," she noted, "accessible only by a private road. Good sightlines in all directions. He'd see anyone coming. Perfect for a predator," Lavra added quietly. "Perfect for watching without being seen." Cooper ended his call. "SWAT teams on standby. We move at dawn. Sarah, I want you there to document everything we find. Emma, keep working the financial angles. If he's alive, he's getting resources from somewhere." Lavra stood straighter. "I'm coming too." "Mom, no," Sarah protested. "It's too dangerous. I've lived with this danger for 40 years, Lavra replied. "Carried it with me every day. I need to see it end." Cooper studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You stay with the command post, but you've earned the right to see this through." Sarah returned to her workstation, preparing her camera equipment for tomorrow's operation. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar tasks while her mind raced. If Kavanaugh was alive, if they found him. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked softly. "About justice," Sarah replied. "About whether it can come too late." "It's never too late for the truth," Lavra said, joining them. "These women deserve to be found, to be remembered. Their families deserve peace." The lab fell quiet again, save for the gentle clicking of Emma's keyboard and the hum of equipment. Outside, the night sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn approaching. Sarah packed her final camera, then turned to her mother. "Ready?" Lavra nodded, her face set with determination. "I've been ready for 40 years. Together, they walked out of the lab into the pre-dawn darkness, preparing to confront the shadows that had haunted their family for decades. The mountain waited, and with it, perhaps, the final pieces of a puzzle that had shaped both their lives. The mountain road wound higher into the dawn, a convoy of unmarked vehicles moving silently through the mist. Sarah sat in the lead SUV with Cooper, her cameras ready, while her mother waited with Emma at the command post established at the base of the mountain. The cabin's coordinates glowed on the GPS screen, less than 2 miles ahead. "Stop here," Cooper ordered softly. The convoy halted, engines idling. Through her telephoto lens, Sarah could see the cabin nestled among the pines. Smoke rose from the chimney. "Someone's home," she whispered, lowering the camera. The implication sent a chill through the vehicle. Cooper's radio crackled with the SWAT team's confirmation. They were in position, surrounding the property. Sarah's hands tightened on her camera as she watched the tactical team move through the trees, their dark forms nearly invisible in the early morning shadows. Then everything happened at once. A door slammed. A figure burst from the cabin's back entrance, moving with surprising speed for an elderly man. Sarah's camera clicked rapidly, documenting the moment. White hair, weathered face. A familiar profile she recognized from old newspaper photos. "Robert Kavanaugh." Cooper's voice boomed through the megaphone. "Stop where you are." The figure froze, then slowly turned. Even at this distance, Sarah could see the cold calculation in his stance. His hands raised slightly, but his eyes darted, searching for escape routes. "It's over, Bob," Cooper continued. "We found everything. The albums, the journals, the trophies." A change came over Kavanaugh's face, a flicker of pride, almost satisfaction. "Took you long enough, James," he called back, his voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Lavra finally convinced you, didn't she?" Sarah felt her blood run cold. He knew. All these years, he'd known they were looking. "Get on your knees," Cooper ordered. "Hands behind your head." Kavanaugh smiled, a terrible, knowing smile. "How is Lavra? Still checking her windows? Still jumping at shadows?" Before anyone could react, he reached into his jacket. Multiple weapons trained on him instantly. "Don't," Cooper warned. But Kavanaugh wasn't reaching for a weapon. He pulled out a small photo album, holding it almost tenderly. "I kept my favorites," he said. "The ones that got away. The ones like Sarah." Sarah's camera nearly slipped from her hands. In that moment, she wasn't a professional photographer documenting a crime scene. She was 11 years old again, feeling watched, vulnerable, afraid. "Drop it," Cooper commanded. "On your knees now." Kavanaugh's smile widened. "You should see the pictures, Sarah. Such a photogenic child. Your mother knew. She always knew. But she couldn't prove it, could she? Not until now." He took a single step backward, toward the cliff edge behind him. Sarah suddenly understood what was about to happen. "Wait," she called out, lowering her camera. "We need to know where they are. The others. The ones after 1997. Something flickered in Kavanaugh's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps that she knew about his later victims. "Clever girl," he murmured. "Just like your mother. Always watching, always noticing details. Tell us," Sarah pressed. "Give their families peace." "Peace?" He laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. There was no peace. Only the watching, the waiting, the perfect moment to strike. "I gave them immortality through my lens. I made them art." The SWAT team was moving closer, but Kavanaugh seemed beyond caring. He clutched the photo album to his chest. "You want to know where they are?" he asked. "Look at the pictures. I always photograph them first. The locations are there, hidden in plain sight." That was the game. leaving clues, wondering if anyone was smart enough to find them. "Drop the album," Cooper ordered again. Last warning. Kavanaugh's face changed, becoming almost peaceful. "It was a good game, Laura," he called out, as if she could hear him. "Teaching you to fear shadows. Teaching Sarah to look over her shoulder. But games must end." Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Sarah's camera captured it all. Kavanaugh stepping backward, the album falling open, photographs scattering in the mountain wind like terrible autumn leaves. His final smile as he tipped over the cliff edge. "No!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The search teams found his body 2 hours later, broken on the rocks below. The scattered photographs were collected as evidence, each one a potential clue to more victims, more families waiting for answers. Sarah sat in the SUV, staring at the images on her camera's display. The moment of his fall, the flying photographs, the end of a 40-year nightmare. But it didn't feel like victory. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emma at the command post. "Your mother needs to see you." The drive down the mountain was silent. When they reached the command post, Laura was waiting, her face pale but composed. "Is it finished?" she asked simply. Sarah nodded, unable to find words. "He kept pictures of me," Laura said quietly. "Didn't he? All these years?" "Yes," Sarah whispered. "But he can't hurt us anymore. Can't hurt anyone." Laura straightened her shoulders, a familiar gesture of gathering strength. "Then we have work to do. Those photographs he scattered, there's final clues. His last challenge." Sarah understood. Even in death, Kavanaugh was playing his game. But now they had all the pieces, the journals, the albums, the map locations. Now they could finally bring everyone home. "We'll find them," she promised her mother. "All of them." Laura took her daughter's hand, squeezing it tightly. Above them, the mountain loomed, its secrets finally beginning to unravel in the morning light. The forensics lab had been transformed into a makeshift incident room, its walls covered with photographs and maps. Each scattered image from Kavanaugh's final album had been carefully collected, cataloged, and analyzed. Sarah stood before the display, her eyes moving from picture to picture, searching for patterns. "The backgrounds are deliberate," she explained to Cooper and Emma. He wasn't just documenting his victims. He was creating a record of their locations. "Look at these landmarks, these geological features. They're all identifiable places." Laura sat nearby, making notes in her precise handwriting. "He wanted us to find them eventually. That's why he kept watching our house even after we moved. He was waiting for someone to put it together." Emma approached with a new set of satellite images. "I've matched 3 of the locations already. Remote areas, but accessible by car. All within a 100-mile radius of his other dump sites." He stayed in his comfort zone, Cooper noted, studying the map. Even after faking his death, he kept to familiar territory. Sarah focused on a particular photograph, a young woman caught in profile, mountains rising behind her. Something about the composition nagged at her professional eye. "The rule of thirds," she murmured. He wasn't just taking surveillance photos. He was composing them deliberately, making sure specific features were visible in exactly the right portions of the frame, like breadcrumbs, Laura said softly. He was leaving a trail. The lab door opened as a young officer rushed in. "Detective Cooper, first search team reports in. They found something at location 3. The room fell silent. Cooper reached for his radio, listening to the grim details. "Human remains, preserved by the mountain climate. Personal effects matching a 1999 missing persons case. That's 7 confirmed victims since his supposed death." Emma updated the board. "How many more photos are we missing?" Sarah studied the scattered images from the cliff. The album he was holding looked thick, maybe 50 pages. "We only recovered 32 photos. The others went over the cliff with him," Cooper said. "Search teams are still combing the ravine, but with the terrain, we don't need them all," Laura interrupted. "Look at the dates, the seasons in each photo." He had a pattern. He always took them in spring or fall, never summer or winter. Sarah's mind raced. The weather conditions. He needed specific light, specific visibility. These weren't just trophy photos. They were maps. She moved to the light table, arranging the recovered photos chronologically. Each location photo has corresponding surveillance photos. He documented his hunting and his disposal sites with the same meticulous attention to detail. Emma was already typing, cross-referencing missing persons cases from neighboring states during spring and fall months. 1997 to present. Check for women with connections to photography or journalism, Lavra added. After me, he seemed to focus on women who reminded him of our family. The pieces were falling into place. A terrible puzzle decades in the making. Sarah felt a familiar chill as she recognized Kavanaugh's methodology. He hadn't just been a killer. He'd been an artist crafting his masterpiece in human suffering. "Sarah," Cooper called softly, "there's something else." The tech team finished processing his laptop from the cabin. He handed her a USB drive. "You should see this first, before your mother." Sarah plugged the drive into her workstation, opening the files. Her breath caught. Hundreds of folders, meticulously organized by date. Each contained surveillance photos of women. Some she recognized from case files, others still unknown. "But the most recent folder, he never stopped watching us," she whispered. The folder contained photos from the past month. Sarah leaving the police station, Lavra at her retirement community, both of them together at their weekly dinner. The final image was dated 3 days ago. "He knew we were getting close," Cooper said. "That's why he was ready to run." Sarah glanced at her mother, still focused on the evidence board. "She can't see these. Not yet. Not until we find them all," Cooper finished. "I understand." The lab door opened again. Another search team reporting in. More remains found. More families to notify. Sarah watched her mother's face as she listened to the details, saw the mix of grief and determination there. "We should take a break," Emma suggested. "It's been 20 hours straight." But Lavra shook her head. "No. Every minute we wait is another minute their families live without answers." Sarah understood. This wasn't just about solving cases anymore. It was about honoring the vigil her mother had kept for 40 years. Every door checked, every window secured, every shadow feared. It had all led to this moment. "Mom," she said gently, "we'll find them. All of them. But we need to do this right." Lavra looked at her daughter, really looked at her, perhaps seeing for the first time how much of her own strength had passed down. "You're right. We have what he always feared we'd find. Proof. Evidence. Now we use it properly." The lab settled into a rhythm of purposeful activity. Search teams reported in regularly as more sites were investigated. Emma's database of potential victims grew as patterns emerged. Cooper coordinated with neighboring jurisdictions, sharing information and resources. And through it all, Sarah kept taking pictures, documenting each piece of evidence, each new discovery. It was what she knew, what she was trained to do. But now each click of the shutter felt like reclaiming something Kavanaugh had tried to take from her. He had turned photography into a weapon. She would use it to bring truth to light. The mountain dawn was breaking again outside the lab windows. Another day of searching, documenting, piecing together a predator's deadly legacy. But now the shadows held no power, only evidence waiting to be found. 2 weeks passed like a fevered dream. The incident room expanded to encompass 3 labs, the evidence mounting as each new search yielded results. Sarah's photographs of the recovery sites lined one wall, a grim catalog of final resting places transformed into scenes of recovery and resolution. 16 confirmed victims since 1997, Emma reported during the morning briefing. DNA matches on 12, still waiting on the others. Cooper nodded, updating the board. That brings the total to 28, including the pre-97 cases we can now officially attribute to Kavanaugh. Lavra sat at her usual spot, surrounded by maps and notebooks. She'd barely left the station in 2 weeks, her retirement community apartment gathering dust. Sarah worried about her mother's obsession, but understood it. This was 40 years of vigilance, finally finding purpose. "There's a pattern to the disposal sites," Lavra said, tracing lines on the map. Concentric circles moving outward from his cabin. Each ring represents a different year. Sarah studied the pattern. He was creating a web, like a spider working from the center outward. More like a photographer composing a landscape, Emma suggested. Each location chosen for specific visual elements that he documented in the surveillance photos. The lab door opened as Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, the forensic psychologist, entered with a thick file. "Final analysis of Kavanaugh's journals," he announced. "It's comprehensive." Sarah noticed her mother's hands tighten on her pen. "What did you find?" "He was building what he considered his masterpiece," Rodriguez explained, spreading photos across the table. Each victim, each location, carefully chosen to create what he called his composition of fear. The surveillance photos weren't just trophies. They were studies for his larger work. "The cabin," Cooper said suddenly. "The whole mountain. He chose it for the view. He could see everything from up there." Sarah's photographer's mind made the connection. It wasn't just a hideout. It was his darkroom, his gallery, the perfect vantage point to watch his artwork unfold across the landscape. Lavra stood abruptly, walking to the window. Sarah followed, concerned. "Mom? I used to think I was paranoid," Lavra said quietly, seeing dangers that weren't there. "But I was right. He was watching, always watching, creating his masterpiece with our fear. But we ended it," Sarah reminded her. "We found his victims. We're bringing them home." "Not all of them," Laura turned, her face set with determination. "The missing photos, the ones that went over the cliff with him, there are still families waiting." Cooper joined them, holding a new satellite image. Search teams found something in the ravine. Not photos, a key. Emma was already pulling up property records. Safe deposit box, different bank than the others. Opened in 2001 under one of his aliases. What was he storing? Sarah asked. "Only one way to find out," Cooper replied. "Bank's waiting for us." The drive to the bank felt endless. Sarah sat in the back with her mother, watching the city scroll past. Laura's hands were steady, but Sarah could feel her tension. The bank manager led them to the vault personally. The box was small, unremarkable. Cooper opened it carefully, photographically documenting each step. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "For Laura Mitchell, you won the game." Sarah felt her mother stiffen beside her. "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Lavra interrupted. "I've been playing his game for 40 years. I need to see how it ends." Back at the lab, Emma plugged in the drive. Files populated the screen, hundreds of them, each labeled with a date and location. But these weren't photographs. They're maps, Sarah realized. Detailed topographical surveys of remote areas, each one marked with GPS coordinates. Cooper was already mobilizing search teams. How many locations? 32, Emma counted, all different from the ones we found so far. Lavra studied the maps, her face pale but composed. He wanted us to find them all. That's why he kept watching us. He was waiting for us to get close enough that he could leave his final clue, a posthumous confession. Rodriguez noted, his last attempt to control the narrative. Sarah looked at the note again. "You won the game," she read. "He saw it all as a competition between him and you, Mom, all these years." "Not a game," Lavra corrected. A war for survival, for justice." She straightened her shoulders. "And we're going to finish it." The next hours were a blur of activity. Search teams deployed to the new locations. DNA analysts prepared 4 more samples. Emma coordinated with missing persons databases across multiple states. Sarah never left her mother's side, watching as Laura meticulously documented each new discovery, each family notified, each victim finally found. It was as if every lock checked, every shadow feared over 40 years was being transformed into purpose. The lab hummed with activity as dawn approached again. Sarah looked at her mother, seeing not the frightened woman who had rushed them away from danger decades ago, but a warrior who had never stopped fighting. "He thought the game was about fear," Lavra said softly, meeting her daughter's gaze. "But it was always about truth, about bringing everything into the light." Outside, more search teams were deploying into the mountain darkness. Soon they would bring back more evidence, more answers, more closure for waiting families. The composition of fear Kavanaugh had spent decades creating was being dismantled, piece by piece, replaced by a different kind of artwork, one made of justice, remembrance, and healing. The mountain air was crisp as Sarah stood beside her mother at the memorial dedication ceremony. 1 year had passed since Kavanaugh's final fall, and the former site of his cabin had been transformed. Where once a predator's lair stood watching over his terrible canvas, now a quiet garden of remembrance stretched toward the sky. We gather today to honor 43 women. Cooper began his address to the assembled families. 43 daughters, sisters, mothers whose stories can finally be told. Sarah raised her camera, documenting this moment as she had documented every step of the investigation. Through her lens, she captured the faces of family members touching the memorial wall where each victim's name was engraved. The morning light caught the tears, the flowers, the healing that had begun. Laura stood at the podium next, her voice strong despite the emotion. For 40 years, I lived in fear of shadows. But these women, they lived in light. They were photographers, journalists, artists, dreamers. Today, we reclaimed their stories from the darkness. The final searches had yielded more than anyone expected. Each location from Kavanaugh's USB drive had led to another victim, another family finding closure. His meticulous records, meant to immortalize his crimes, instead became the key to undoing his legacy. Emma had created a database archiving every piece of evidence, every photograph, every journal entry. It would serve as a resource for law enforcement, a tool to prevent future predators from operating undetected for so long. She stood now with the other investigators, watching as family members place photographs of their loved ones on the memorial wall. The composition is different now, Laura said softly to Sarah as they walked through the garden after the ceremony. You tried to create a landscape of fear, but look what we built instead. Sarah looked around at the carefully planned gardens, the peaceful paths leading to quiet places of reflection. Her own photographs of the transformation process were part of a permanent exhibition inside the Memorial Center, documenting not the crimes, but the journey toward justice and healing. You never stopped fighting, Sarah said, taking her mother's hand. Even when I didn't understand why you were so afraid, you were protecting me and gathering evidence. I was protecting you. Laura agreed, but these women deserve protection too. Their families deserved answers. That's why I kept everything, every scrap of information, every suspicion. The garden path led them to a small reflecting pool where copper leaves danced in the water. Sarah thought about the changes the past year had brought. Her mother no longer checked locks compulsively or startled at shadows. The hypervigilance of decades had transformed into purposeful awareness. The support group is growing, Laura said, referring to the organization she'd founded for families of victims. We're helping them turn their grief into action. Some are working to change laws about evidence preservation. Others are creating safety programs. Sarah nodded. She'd photographed many of their meetings, documenting another kind of transformation, from victims' families to advocates for change. The fear that Kavanaugh had tried to immortalize was becoming a force for prevention, protection, and healing. Cooper joined them by the reflecting pool. The FBI is using your mother's documentation methods as a training model now, he told Sarah, teaching officers to recognize patterns, to take seriously the kind of details Laura noticed. He thought he was creating art, Sarah said, looking at the peaceful garden. But this is the real masterpiece. Truth, justice, remembrance. The Memorial Center had become more than just a monument to the victims. It was a resource center, a place of education and prevention. Sarah's photographs lined the walls, telling the story not just of what was lost, but of what was found: courage, resilience, the strength of families united in seeking truth. Laura touched one of the copper leaves floating in the pool. I used to dream about them, she said quietly. The women I couldn't save. Now I dream about their families finding peace, about other women being protected because we finally brought everything into the light. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. Where Kavanaugh had once watched over his terrible domain, now families gathered to remember, to heal, to transform grief into purpose. His carefully composed landscape of fear had been reclaimed by love, strength, and determination. Sarah raised her camera one last time, capturing the moment as her mother stood in the sunlight, finally free of shadows. Through her lens, she saw not just the end of a 40-year nightmare, but the beginning of something powerful and healing. The game is over, Laura said, smiling at her daughter. But the real work, the work of remembrance, of protection, of change, that's just beginning. Around them, the garden bloomed in the mountain morning. Families lingered by the memorial wall, sharing stories, finding connection in their shared journey toward healing. The sound of gentle water and wind in the pines replaced the silence of secrets too long kept. Sarah lowered her camera and took her mother's hand. Together, they walked the peaceful paths of the garden, no longer afraid of what lurked in shadows. They had brought everything into the light, transformed fear into purpose, and created something lasting from the darkness of the past. Above them, the mountain stood watch, but its secrets were secrets no more. In their place grew a garden of remembrance, a testimony to the power of truth, the strength of mothers and daughters, and the enduring light of justice finally served. If you enjoyed this story, we'd love for you to support us by leaving a like and subscribing to our Slices of Life channel. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Which city are you talking about? It's very rewarding for us to provide our followers with an enjoyable moment. We appreciate the unconditional support you show us in every story. Blessings!